Marketo user group meeting, you know that we always go through the housekeeping slides at the beginning. So just want to, and they'll probably sound very familiar to you. The purpose of them and the purpose of all the rules are really just to keep the mugs user focused and a safe space for members. So no self-promotion, no pitching of any kind in mugs. Don't contact people outside without permission. And if mug members share their use case, please don't share it without their consent. This meeting is being recorded. I should have said that when you first started. So it's being recorded August 22nd, 2024. It will go to the Mug YouTube channel. And if you don't wish to be participating in a live recorded session, you can drop off and get the recording at a later date. To stay connected with our chapter, go to mugs.marketo.com/Austin-mug. And you create an account if you already have one with the email that's associated with your Adobe Marketo Engage account. And you can receive notifications. You can also sign up for all different locations, because most of the locations have virtual events. So it's sometimes good to get several options. I'm getting lots of feedback. Oh, there we go. All right. If you're interested in helping lead the way in Austin, we're just starting back our Austin chapter, and we're looking for a second co-leader in Austin. So we'd love to get someone else on board to help drive the Marketo user group in Austin. Just reach out to me, Robin at robinhatfield.com, or on my LinkedIn, whichever's easier. And then from here, the best part is I get to introduce Alysha, and I'm going to say stop sharing. And Alysha, a seasoned marketer, Marketo professional. If you've ever seen any of her presentations, always outstanding, always learned so much from them. She is a certified solutions architect. She is a Marketo champion. She has vast experience and expertise in campaign operations and processes. So looking forward. Alysha, take it from here.
All right. Thank you so much, Robin. That was such a lovely intro. I feel way fancier than I think maybe I am sitting in my office. Welcome, guys. Today I will be going through my presentation. Let's see, share screen. Did do a dry run here. All right. Oh no, why is it trying to connect? All right, you guys can see this, right? Cool. Well, please don't crash on me. All right, let's go slideshow. Cool beans. Okay, we are doing 0 to Campaign Ops Hero, how to build, scale, and customize a demand center. This is a presentation that I did at Mopsapalooza last year, 2023. So now, if you were there, you get to ask me questions in person, or you get some brand new information if you could not pay to attend. So you're getting free content that was previously paid for. And before I jump in, one sort of big takeaway up front I want to give you is that this is a presentation about building blocks. And when we're talking about building blocks, there's really one of two outcomes that I want you to walk away with here. One is you can recognize, oh, hey, I have pieces 1, 2, 3 in place. And now that gives me the ability to do 4, 5, 6. Or if you're like, hey, I really want to do 4, 5, 6, but I don't really know what I need to do to get there, or how, or like the path there seems murky, I'm going to be able to give you basically 1, 2, 3. And then you can work on 1, 2, 3, and then eventually get to 4, 5, 6. So that's sort of the two takeaways that I want you to have here is either you have X and you can get to Y, or you want Y and now you know how to get there. So as Robin said, I am a certified architect, Marketo Engage Champion, but really deep down, I am a campaign ops enthusiast. No matter how fancy your instance, there's something very fun about just sending emails to people. So are you drowning in an endless sea of like super urgent, top priority, everybody has a fire kind of campaign requests? Or when they do have a request, nobody ever actually has all the information they need to give you? I mean, how many of us have been asked for an email build and like there's like no subject line, there's no copy, who does it need to go to? Nobody knows. Or when they do have a request, nobody has any idea how long anything takes. They're like, oh, an email? I mean, sure, we can get on in 30 minutes, right? Isn't that a thing? And you're like, no, emails do not get sent in 30 minutes. That's how you like embarrass yourself in front of the whole world. So if any of this rings familiar, then what you need is a campaign demand center. And that feels like a very fancy phrase, but it's really just a way to think about optimizing your campaign build and production process, from intaking the request to building the campaign to QAing it and then launching it in just a really seamless, coordinated way, so that way you can get better and faster over time. So for today's agenda, we are going to talk through the 4 distinct stages of the campaign production process. We are then going to take those 4 stages and then sort of tier out a crawl, walk, jog, run to setting up a full campaign demand center. And then we're going to talk through a bunch of little process changes along the way. So let's first jump into the campaign production process, which is really the backbone of how you would set up a demand center. Now, I want to take a minute just to emphasize why we even need to define a process. Because I think for most of us, when we get a campaign request, when we get an email, we're like, oh yeah, easy peasy, I could do this in my sleep, which is fine, which is true. I'm not denying that, friend. Most of us, right? We could knock out an email. But defining a process and then creating stages with distinct steps actually has a lot of specific benefits to it, right? One, when we have specific stages and specific steps, we can dedicate time and mental space to each step of the process, right? And then we can then define best practices for each stage. Those two together is really how we cut through errors, right? Because when we're just sort of blindly muddling through a build, even though we've done it before, when we don't know exactly what we're supposed to be doing, that's how we easily miss steps, and that's how we easily make preventable mistakes. Then, when you have a specific process with specific stages, you can then much more easily clarify with your stakeholders what their deliverables are actually going to be, right? So if you're getting an email, are you getting 1 email, 2 emails? Do they get proofs? Do they get an audience count? Especially for larger webinar builds, for example, are they getting invites, or do we only build 1 invite up front? Clarifying those expectations only really happens when you can define upfront what's going to happen. And then once you have all of these pieces, you can then also create some really accurate SLAs, right? I think we in MOPs just sort of like pick a number sometimes for SLAs, like 3 days sounds good. But once you know what the steps are, what's going to happen in each stage, what you're actually going to turn around, then you'll know that like, oh yeah, we could do an email in 2, but like 2 emails weirdly takes 4 days for these really specific reasons. And then if people have questions, you can answer that much more easily. So the campaign production process has 4 stages. Stage 1 is intake. And this is one that I think, as I'm going to talk about later, as we get into each of these stages, is actually the most important stage that we have here. Because when you intake a request, i.e. receive the request, triage it, and then assign it out to build, that is where you are doing the bulk of the upfront work that's going to set the rest of the process up for success. Then the next stage after intake is build. This is the one where I think when we think about, sending out an email, the stage that we all think about is just building the campaign and getting it to the stakeholder and making sure it's approved. Then we have stage 3, which is QA. And what we're really going to talk about in QA is creating a formal QA process, and not necessarily like, I think the spot checks a lot of us tend towards, right? I think we're all pretty good about like double checking things, but true, I think I'm going to call it like technical excellence happens when you have a formalized QA process that checks the same things again and again. Then finally, stage 4 is launch. This is where we do our final checks, we schedule the campaign out, and then most critically, we're going to set ourselves up for success by creating touch points to make it easier to go back for performance reporting and campaign review. So let's jump into each of these stages specifically. So first stage is intake. So intake, as I mentioned previously, has 3 substages, which is the request, triage, and assignment. So request is the substage where your stakeholder is going to submit the request for review via a project management tool. Now, the part I'd really like to if I could underline on a blackboard, I would, is it's via a project management tool. We don't want Slacks, we don't want emails or DMs or messenger pigeons or whatever the heck people are going to come up with. It needs to be in a project management tool. That is a baseline criteria that we're going to talk about a little bit later in our crawl, walk, jog, run, that having a PM tool is super critical to running a well-oiled demand center. Now, Once we've got the request in, the next stage is reviewing and validating the request. And this is, I think, again, one of those steps that like a lot of us, I think, do sort of subconsciously or unconsciously, but we don't really define it for ourselves and create that checklist almost mentally of what we're looking for, right? So this is looking through all the email copy in advance to make sure we have it. This is looking through all the audience requirements to make sure that like the audience build even makes sense for what information you know exists in the database. This is looking through any like brand new like webinar requests, or I guess I was thinking of like nurtures, for example, to make sure that like before we even put our fingers on the keyboard in Marketo, we know what's being requested and if it actually makes sense and is doable, right? And this is where you also often have to hold a strong line with your stakeholders of like, hey, like we need all the email copy. We're not just going to build something because you asked for it. Like you need to give us all the things we need up front in order for us to get this most efficiently done. And then the last stage is assignment. This is where we're going to take the ticket and then assign it out to a builder. Now, if you're like a 1-person, 2-person shop, this is like a 2-second task, but I want to highlight this as a specific stage because as your team grows, as the organization gets bigger, as you bring on freelancers, contractors to do this kind of work, assignment becomes a bigger piece of the puzzle where you have to figure out who has the capacity to take the work, who has the technical knowledge to take the work. And this becomes a real actual step you need to sit down and think through. And that's why we really highlight it here. Like, hey, this stage exists. It may not be a problem now, but it will eventually be a problem once your team hits a certain size. So for intake, a couple of key components. 1 is a project management tool, as I mentioned. 2 is a defined submission process. So any PM tool can be used a million different ways. So with the PM tool, you're definitely going to need a defined process so that way people know how to use it and how to get the ticket to you in a way that makes sense for you, right? Because in any PM tool, you could submit a form, you could just create a ticket ad hoc. Some of them have like a Slack connection that you can Slack in a ticket. You want to create a really clear way for people to submit that. And when they're submitting it, you also then want to have a content submission doc so that way you can collect all the necessary copy, links, and all that jazz in an organized fashion. And the content submission doc can also help reinforce some of those upfront requirements, right? So for emails, if you need a subject line, your content submission doc will have a required section for subject line. So that way you are sort of, you're layering in your nudges to make sure that people get you the information that you need. Then for intake, we're also going to be defining at some point in our growth journey here, minimum viable production requirements. And this is the absolute bare minimum your team needs before they begin working on this. Now, in our email example, you kind of need everything up front, right? You need audience, subject line, you need the copy, you need images. But let's say we're talking about a webinar, right? Maybe it's that you want to build out only invite 1 of the landing page up front, and those are your minimum requirements. That's totally fine, right? That's something that then you can agree on with your marketing team, and that creates the baseline expectation of what the deliverables will be for that first round of build, right? And then invite 2 and invite 3 are handled separately. Or it could be that like, for whatever reason in your team, you're like, absolutely not. I want all the copy up front. I'm okay like cutting it a little bit closer to like deadlines, but like if we don't get all copy up front, apparently maybe you just never get it, right? And it creates bigger problems. So that's where defining those requirements up front and communicating that with your stakeholders helps create that better process, because then you know what you're working on, what you're supposed to be getting, and then you and the marketing team are on the same page about expectations. And then from there, we need some SLAs. We just need some basic agreements about, hey, you get me the ticket, you get me a complete ticket, and I will get you something, and this will be launched within 3 days, 4 days, whatever. Now, the intake stage typically can be completed by the MOPs manager. It can also be completed by the person who's building the campaign. And this can also be completed by a PM, right? So this doesn't necessarily have to be like a marketing ops person. A PM with some knowledge of MOPs, with some knowledge of marketing could do this stage really well. So then just a little bit of order of operations here. The MVP requirements that you define will be in your content submission doc. That's where you can indicate what's required and what's not required. Your content submission docs will then be captured by your submission process, which is in your PM tool, and then it will come to you for triage and assignment. Tips-a-palooza. I'm talking a lot about intake. but it doesn't actually have to take you that long, right? I think most of us can do it fairly quickly. But for the more complex the campaign, that's when having all of these definitions and all of these clear steps really helps, right? Because then you know that you have to sit down and make sure, okay, has everything been submitted? Have I reviewed everything? Have I assigned it out to build to people who can like actually build out the super complex campaign, right? Your standard email, you're going to knock through this in a minute and it's totally fine. But once you start to grow, once you start to have volume and complexity, that's where this starts to take more time and it matters a lot more, but it really helps set you up for success. Then my last point here, having a user-friendly process is so critical because right now you are going to be asking a lot of your marketing team, right? There are going to be forms to fill out and documents to fill out and links to get you. And you want to make this as simple as possible for them, right? So this is, again, one of those things that you're just going to have to feel out of like, how long is too long a form for your team, right? How complex is too complex a doc, right? There will probably be several iterations. There will probably be some like required logic or some kind of like dependent fields in your form, but really just keep in the forefront that like you need your marketing team to give you this in order to be really good at your job. So you cannot make it too onerous a process. Otherwise, people just won't do it. And that's what we really want to stay away from. So, all right. Next up is build. So now that we've laid all this groundwork, we can get on to actually building the campaign. And the build stage is, again, I'm just going to break this down a little bit just so we can think about it, is when the campaign builder actually builds the thing, right? The email is built, the webinar program is built, the whatever the heck is built. The campaign builder then, this is again now 2 stages that I really want to break out specifically, is does a round of self QA, right? Because I think, especially if you're newer or you're just like, I've built an email 1,000,000 times. I don't need to double check my work. We have all had that thought. And one day it will get us all in trouble. It already has gotten you in trouble and you kicked yourself, right? You are going to self QA your work. You're going to do that double check. You're going to walk away from your desk for 5 minutes, come back and like just do a quick scan over everything before you submit it to your stakeholder for review. The other reason is this is important is that your relationship with your marketing stakeholders is based on trust. And turning over sloppy work for like silly reasons is going to wear down that trust so fast, right? Like marketing ops and marketing teams have enough challenges with relationships and agreeing on things and like expectations and like all that jazz. Let's not add fuel to the fire by doing silly things that like could have very easily been avoided by double checking our own work. Then this is another really key stage. Your stakeholder needs to look over what you have built and like approve it in writing in your PM tool. Ideally, if it's approved elsewhere, you can just sort of notate it in the PM tool, right? This is another one where it's very easy for especially marketing teams, even for us, right? For folks all around to be like, okay, cool, it's built, launch it. I don't need to double check it. We need to double check it. We always need to double check it because especially the marketing person has a different view on it, right? They've written this copy. There are often times where sometimes seeing it physically in the email changes their mind about something, right? Or like the headline like doesn't sit the way they want it to sit, or they're like, oh, but that image, it doesn't write, like it may not work for them when they've physically seen the email or the landing page or whatever, right? So it's really important that you're enforcing with your stakeholders that, hey, you need to literally look at the thing and approve it before we move on to QAing and launching it, right? So how do we get good about the build process? The key components is you need a repeatable build process. Now, for Marketo, this means program templates. If you're ever in any other tool, it's clonable campaign components and HubSpot or Pardot, but frankly, this is Marketo. Like Marketo is built to do this sort of high volume repetition kind of campaign build work. Then you need good email and landing page templates. I cannot begin to tell you how much time you will save by having a good email and landing page template, because the amount of like dumb fiddly stuff with a bad template and how much time that will suck. Like a good email template, I think you can easily get it for maybe $2,000, $3,000 out there, and it will pay for itself so fast. And then you need build documentation, because especially as a smaller team, 1 people, 2 people, 3 people, it's easy for everybody to know how it's something built. But once you start to scale at any level, it's very easy for that knowledge to get lost. People leave, things change, and all of that stuff then needs to be written down somewhere that somebody else could pick up this document. If your entire team won the lottery and left, somebody else can come in, pick it up, and like things can kind of be fine. And then this entire stage, it is completed. It is done by the campaign builder. Again, this could be the MOPs manager, contractor, freelancer, somebody else in the team, but this stage is done by the campaign builder. Then we have QA. So campaign build, you've built it, self-QA'd it, stakeholders approved it. Now we're on to QA. The key part about QA here is that this is a repeatable, standardized process, right? We are not just double checking things. We are creating an actual process that every campaign gets checked about the same things. So the key part of running a really good QA process is that you need a repeatable build process. You need really strong program templates, because if everything is being built slightly differently, it's going to be really hard to double check they've all been built the same way, right? So if you're having QA issues, you have program template issues that you need to suss out first, because then once your program templates are locked and loaded, your QA is going to go a lot better. Then in order to run your QA, you need a QA brief, a QA checklist, which we'll talk about shortly, those two pieces. And then you need a buddy system. Now, in a perfect world, there are two people on your team, and the person who did not build the campaign QAs the campaign. That is not always the case. So if you need to do a formal QA of your own work, you have to take a break. You have to walk away. You have to build time into your SLAs that, hey, we need a half-day buffer in here so that way I can get a fresh set of eyes on this, right? And then eventually this is where this is a piece where maybe you can also maybe there's somebody in marketing who you train up a little bit in Marketo so that way they can help you with this piece, right? This is the one where you can definitely it's not a make or break, but it's definitely a very nice to have, is to have a proper buddy system in order to get your QA done. So let's talk about the order of operations here, right? So your repeatable build process in Marketo, this is program templates. This is going to define what we're going to call the key areas of the build, right? So let's go back to our email send example. There are many ways to send an email, but your program templates are going to define what is the way that you, for this campaign, are going to send this email. And that is, in this example, we are going to use a smart campaign to send the email, not an email send program, not a requestable, nothing, smart campaign is sending the email invite. Then your QA brief is going to collect all the information that your buddy will need to complete the QA, right? So in the brief, you're going to say, hey, this is the email I want to send, and this is the send campaign I want to use to send it. And then along with all the other other information you need about when it needs to send, what the program is, all that jazz. Your QA checklist then is then going to confirm that the brief and the program that's built all match up, right? So then the QA checklist then is essentially confirming that is the right smart campaign sending the right email asset, right? And you can see how there's many ways this can fall apart, right? Maybe it's the wrong smart campaign. It's got the wrong email asset. Maybe you've got the completely wrong program handed to you and nothing matches up, right? So this is where all of these pieces sort of work together. But then once you've got it all locked, you've got a very smooth process of yep, we're using smart campaign, send the email invite. In the brief, I will give you the link to the email in the smart campaign. You will just double check that it's right. And then bada bing, email is out the door. All right, lastly, we have launch. Easiest step of the game. So this is where we're going to do a quick double check that we've got the date, time, affected audience size, all those little details. We're going to double check all that. We're going to schedule the sucker, launch the sucker, whatever definition of launch is for that campaign. But then here's a really key part. In your PM tool, you're going to make sure you have tasks for performance reporting and campaign review. Because I think we do so much of this stuff and it's so easy to forget to go back and double check on how things did, that you're going to make sure that you have the infrastructure built out in advance to prompt you to go back and double check it, right? So whether that's per campaign, or there's a monthly thing, a monthly email report that you have tickets built out for, whatever that looks like, you're going to make sure you just have those tasks locked and loaded in your PM tool so you don't have to think about it. So the key components here then, we do want a launch checklist ideally. This helps for things especially after the webinar is launched, we need to notify the sales team, right? Easy, it's a small thing to forget, but having a checklist really helps with that. Or after an email is launched, I'm going to put the email send time and date and audience size on the email calendar, right? A checklist can help you keep track of all those little tasks that need to happen after launch. Then we're also going to talk about template reports, right? Because the easiest way to get reporting done is to make it as easy as possible. And that means templates, right? That just means like you just got to update like maybe the date range or something small, and like you have your report done and done. And then, as I mentioned, PM tool tasks or tasks in your PM tool to make sure all this happens. And this can then be completed by the campaign builder as well, sort of just as like a final wrap up of the work they are doing. So all of that is our production process. I'm going to take a sip of water. And then we're going to talk about how to layer all of the different things we talked about to a crawl, walk, jog, run your way to a demand center. So crawl is where we are building a foundation for future processes and building good organizational habits. And I think the building good habits is really the key piece of it, right? Because if you get people in the habit of using a PM tool, if like that is their first thought, so much work is already done, right? If you get people in the habit of like double checking, of like reviewing if you get your marketing people in the habit of checking their builds, again, so much work is already done, right? Those are those good organizational habits that make the rest of this so much easier. Then walk is about turning that foundation into a seamless conveyor belt, right? So that way we're not just handling onesies and twosies. We can do 5, 6, 10 campaigns and it feels really good. Then at jog is where we're going to take a look at everything we've already done and figure out where we can optimize, where we can hone in on our process, because now you've done enough, right? Now you've done the volume to find the patterns and to find the tendencies in your marketing team that you either need to fix, sort of exploit a little bit, or like maybe they tell you every time they will get you the copy and they never do, right? By the jog stage, you'll know what they actually do. And then you can sort of adjust your process to account for the reality of what you know that the marketing team is up to. And then run is really thinking about, if I had to do like 50 campaigns, you basically had to like 10x your volume randomly, like what would that take, right? That's about the last stage is really just about scaling and future-proofing your demand center. So now, disclaimer again, before all of this, I'm going to put it in a neat and tidy order. This is not going to be a reality. It's never going to be anybody's reality. Again, as I mentioned up front about building blocks, this is really just understanding what pieces set you up for other pieces down the line, right? Or also knowing that like, oh yeah, we're kind of at jog, but like there's this other weird thing we're struggling with. And you can realize that, hey, oh yeah, it's because we're missing these like other foundational pieces, right? If you're like, back to my previous example, if like your QA is kind of like constantly finding problems, maybe it's because you need program templates. You need better program templates or better email landing page templates, right? So that's what I really want you to sort of think about this is how things are layered and how they build upon each other. So that way you can figure out where you can go for yourself. Shweta, I saw you raise your hand. I'm happy to, I'm happy to pause for questions or we can take them at the end.
Let me know. I can ask now.
Yeah, why don't you drop it in the chat and then I can take a peruse at it as I'm going through or see if it comes up along the way. Oops.
All right. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right. So crawl. The motto of crawl is functional over fancy. We just want things to work. We just want them to work well. Nothing is going to look pretty or like be super fancy here. So again, our goals here is to build a foundation and then start building good habits. So the key points of this stage is implementing a PM tool, developing a super basic content submission doc, basic SLA framework, basic QA checklist, and then your template reports. So PM tool. Your company probably has them floating around. Somebody's using it somewhere. Asana, Rike, Jira, Workfront, Monday.com. I don't like Monday. That's neither here nor there. Basecamp, Trello, whatever. They all kind of do the same thing. Pick your favorite. Pick what your company's using. Doesn't really matter. You just need one. Any one. And what you need in that PM tool is you need to have statuses to track the progression of work, right? Again, doesn't have to be fancy, but like a really basic to-do in progress done is the bare minimum you need here just to be able to see where things are. And then as we go, you can add more statuses. And then you need a clear submission process, right? Whether this is a form people fill out, whether it's like, hey, clone this ticket to make your ticket, whatever it is. And then for all your tickets that are incoming, tasks for your key steps of intake, build, approve, and create reporting and whatever. Most PM tools will allow you to do some basic automation, so you don't have to manually do this every time. But at a very basic level, you need to be able to track the progression of work. You need a way for people to submit tickets, and then you need tasks for yourself. Your content submission doc. Again, we're keeping it really simple. A key point here is to make sure it is in your team's system of choice. If you're in a Google Drive company, don't give them a Word doc that they have to like download and upload. Like, make it a Google Doc, right? This may seem obvious, but I've definitely, like, as a consultant, seen companies that are like, please fill out this Excel document, and nobody uses Excel. And you're like, please put it in a Google Doc. Everybody uses Google Doc. And this goes back to our point of like keeping things super user-friendly. We want to reduce that friction wherever possible. And then this content doc, what you really just want to hear is enough sections to like capture the key information you need in terms of like copy, URL, links to images, audience criteria. And again, it's just really simple layout, right? You don't want this to be like overwhelming or intimidating where people have to fill out like 20 different boxes. Like, you just want to make sure you got the basics in a doc that they can then submit back to you. SLA framework. Again, as you'll notice, the theme of this, easy, simple to understand. We're not even talking about like times by campaign, none of that jazz. All tickets will be responded to within 24 hours, 12 hours, 48 hours, whatever, pick a number. It just matters that you communicate that out back to the marketing team, right? Of like, hey, 24 hours. I will respond to you within 24 hours. And that is also then up to us MOPS people to actually respond to them in 24 hours, right? I know we talk a lot about enforcement on the marketing side, but this is a key piece of this is holding yourself to that standard, right? Of like, if you say you will respond within 24 hours, you absolutely have to respond within 24 hours, even if the response is like, hi, yes, acknowledging receipt and am reviewing, more details to come in like tomorrow, right? Even if that is all you do is buy yourself more time, you still need to hold up your end of the SLA bargain as well. So then another basic SLA example is like all requests must be submitted 5 days before launch, right? This one is also a really easy one where you can say 5 days for everything. And when you get it done in 3 days, you will look like a superstar, right? Or you can say a week. And when you get it done in like, again, 4 days, 3 days, you look like a superstar because you've technically worked faster. But at this stage, we're not really trying to like, an email takes 3 days, a webinar takes 5 days. Like, you just want people to have an easy number to remember of like 1 week before the MOPS person needs the things, and then they will figure it out. Then you want to have some sort of protocol pathway somewhere for actually urgent requests to go, right? Because that will happen, right? Not everything can follow the SLA, but you just want to define that process out for yourself so that way they know and you know what's going to happen, right? Of like, if this is actually urgent, and like, it also helps to define urgent, right? We don't want to get into like the territory of, it's that Willy Wonka meme of like, your lack of planning is not an emergency on my part. Like, we want real emergencies of like, our system crashed and we need an email out. The CEO really wants this webinar invite launched. That kind of true emergencies, right? So maybe your protocol is something like, hey, if you submit an urgent ticket, it needs to be accompanied by a Slack message, or you need to do something else to make sure that I know it's actually urgent, right? And then you hold yourself to reviewing it much more faster than you would a regular request. So with those SLAs, as I've sort of alluded to this throughout this, enforcement is really key, right? Granted, exceptions will need to be made, but really think it through, because at this stage, we are setting ourselves up. We are creating those good organizational habits. So if you are too lax, if you're too flexible, people will learn that they mean nothing, or they mean very little, or it's kind of sporadic, and people will learn to try their luck. And when you have onesies, twosies campaigns, not a big deal. But when you have 10, 20 campaigns, it becomes a real big problem. So enforcement is necessary. You're going to do it nicely, kindly, but firmly. All right. Shweta, I thought you have a really good question. I think this is a little bit more detailed, so I'd like to get to the end of, I'm going to mosey through this because I think this is a good question. Not mosey, I'm going to go faster. Sorry, opposite of mosey. And then record. Yeah, we'll get this at the end. All right. Oops, wrong keys. There we go. Okay, basic QA checklists. Now, This is part of crawl, because if you are launching campaigns, you should be QAing campaigns. If I could like have this nailed on everybody's walls, every MOPS person's walls, I could. At this point, your priority is emails and landing pages, really anything that is public facing, not necessarily like the back end stuff that technically you could fix with a batch campaign, right? They're both kind of bad, but emails and landing pages are extra bad, because especially emails, because there's no take backsies. There's just, once it's out, and all you can do is apologize. There's no fixing it. And at this point, your QA checklist should really be focused on what I'm going to call like critical errors, right? So these are like the wrong email asset is being sent out. The wrong people are getting the email. There are broken links in the email, or like there is no subject line. You want to address the really big errors that make you look extra bad versus like, technically we had the wrong status in the smart campaign for the Salesforce sync, right? Also not great, but fixable. That's fixable. When you send out the wrong email, there is no fixing it. And at this stage, we want our QA to catch those kind of errors. All right. And then template reports. This is, basic campaign reporting. This is really like discussing with the marketing team what metrics they need to see, and then making sure you have those reports easily configured for you to move out or for you to clone out. So then walk. Now here, it's about finding our groove. And that means starting to add in more infrastructure so we can start to do more campaigns and do them better and faster. So this is where we get into the repeatable build process, implementing landing page templates and email templates, basic build documentation, MVP requirements, a formal submission process, and then a QA checklist for all major campaign types. So by this point, you should have done enough that you have a rough idea of what your program templates need to look like, right? This is where you've sent out couple dozen emails, and you know that, hey, okay, our webinars really only ever get to 2 invites, and you can start to build that out into your program templates. Or our trade show list imports we only need like a visited booth and a scan badge. We don't need all the other statuses for reasons. You can really start to build into that. Then, as I mentioned earlier, good landing page and email templates. You will save yourself so much time. Please buy yourself nice templates. It will make you so happy. Then build documentation. And this really goes hand in hand with the creation of those program templates, because as you're making those templates, just document what needs to happen as you build them, right? So that way, this isn't like an extra project you have to take on. You're just folding it into existing work that already needs to happen of creating or updating your existing templates. And at this point, what we really just want to capture is like the really necessary information of like, all emails need this token in order to do this really important thing. Or like, there is some other really critical piece that needs to happen every time. And like that information should not live in people's heads. And this kind of documentation, I prefer a combination of written and recordings. Recordings are very easy to make, because especially like as you're building it, you can just pop open. I like to use Loom. You can use literally a Zoom recording and just share your screen and record yourself doing it. Record your own work and then just have that link available for people. Okay. And at this point, this is also like, you should be able to explain the process to like other MOPS people or somebody else on your team. This doesn't need to be exhaustive, but just again, enough that like the critical steps can be followed to launch a campaign. Then for all major campaign types, we're going to start to outline those MVP requirements and making sure that our content submission doc reflects those. And I am going to say major campaign types, right? Because if, for example, if you're only doing emails and webinars, you do this for emails and webinars, and the rest of them we sort of sort out when the time comes, right? We're going to do the work for the work that's actually happening and not like all the theoretical cases that your company may not have gotten to yet. And then for the formal submission process, we're going to go from like, hey, just use a form or use a ticket to like creating a proper intake form or creating a set of template tickets. We're just going to spend a little bit more time here, because now that we know what our MVP requirements are, because we know what some of the most common campaign types are, we can start to more specifically ask for the information that we need, and then have basically the entire process reinforcing itself of the right information that needs to get to you. And then again, QA checklist for all major campaign types. At this point, we can also start to include things that maybe aren't public facing, such as list uploads. If you're doing a lot of list uploads, for example, great time to actually build out that QA checklist. And at this point, you can also start to be a little bit more in depth with the checklist, especially if you want to add in some like automation logic or like double checking, for example, Salesforce campaign sync steps, things like that. Then we're on to jog. And this is where we can finally get like a little bit of fancy, because at this point we've done a lot of volume of campaigns and we know a lot more. So let's just go straight into it. More detailed SLAs. At this point, you will definitely know how long things take, and you will have added some of those efficiencies up front, like program templates, like good email and landing page templates, to start to already shave off time. So that way you now know that, hey, we can get an email out in 2 days, or hey, the webinar actually does take me 5 days to build, but like I can explain to you why. And if marketing has an issue with it, you can now talk to them about why it takes as long as it takes, because you've done, for example, 20 webinars and you know that like maybe the webinar platform never syncs. I'm also making things up. So, or like the invite copy is never as baked as it needs to be, and it takes like 3 days of back and forth to get invites built, right? Now you know this and you've built it into your SLAs. And if people have an issue with it, you can be like, okay, great. If you want this to go faster, you need to do X part, right? And then you can be like, yeah, if you do X, I can do it this much faster. And then we can see where we land, right? So at this point, it's a great time to start working through those more detailed SLAs, because you'll be able to back them up a lot better. Then more advanced campaign reporting. At this point, again, because of the volume, you'll start to get a better idea, and your marketing team will start to know more about what kind of reporting they need and what data points they actually want to see after a campaign. And then here you can sort of start to create that launch checklist, right? This is where you can focus on formalizing that post-campaign process of like, these teams need to be notified, or like this report needs to be run, or this task needs to be updated. And then again, using your PM tool to provide the digital support that's needed. And now this is the fun part, right? And I'm really sorry that it takes time to get to the fun part, because the fun part's only possible once you have all those basic building blocks in place, is that now you can start exploring processes for very company specific things, right? Everything we've talked about before this is very like campaign ops 101, or like no matter what company you're at, you need to be doing these things. This is the stuff that is very company dependent, right? So this is like, is agile or sprint planning like a good fit for the team? Are there yearly, quarterly campaigns that keep cropping up that like would really benefit from having their own process? Are there specific teams that need more training, or like, do you have a specific need for a tool that would make things a lot better, right? Now that you've done all that background foundational work, you can start to think about these really interesting things of how you can now handle even more volume through your demand center. And now finally, we are at run to infinity and beyond. So the key part of this stage is that if your campaign volume doubled, I think I said 10x earlier, that's crazy. If it doubled next quarter, what would you do to handle it, right? So this is starting to implement some of the ideas from the jog stage. Just go there. Because now you've done that research, right? You started doing, like, you've already thought about these things. You've done some of the research, you've done the legwork, and now you can just figure out what it would actually take. And then going to the thought exercise of your campaign volume doubling, is it more people, a better PM tool, better training on the current PM tool, better planning processes, more team education, right? Like, you've now got all these pieces in place, and you can actually think about what lever would you need to pull to handle more campaign volume, and then start prioritizing those initiatives as your company starts to tell you like, hey, yeah, we're going to be doing more campaigns next quarter. Then at this point, you can also, speaking of new tools, start to really automate that QA process. Workato, Zapier, all those stuff can add some nice automation to that, where you can just submit the request automatically gets routed when the QA is complete, gets routed back to the stakeholder. Nice, you can get a really nice system going. You can also sort of do a round robin or something if you need to evenly distribute QAs amongst a larger team. Then at this point, we're going to really focus on documentation, right? Like thorough. If your entire team won the lottery and quit, somebody else could step in and pick up the pieces, because your documentation is that good. And at this point, one thing you really want to focus on is why. Because I know so many of us have walked into systems that, like, it's built a slightly weird way. Nobody can tell you why, but you quickly do discover that there's a very important why on the why it's built weirdly. And you're just like, darn it, if somebody had written this down. So you're going to do future you, future other person a favor and write down all those whys. So that way they will know, the future of the company will know why this weird thing happens in the system the way that it does. So then that is our crawl, walk, jog, run. And some final thoughts for you. As you've probably heard me say, foundations really, really matter, right? If all you do from this is the crawl and the jog steps, you have done so much and you will be in such a better place. Functionality. You've heard me talking about user friendliness, about reducing friction. Make things functional versus super pretty or super fancy, and it will go a lot further with folks in your marketing team. And then invest in intake and QA. I think most of us like to build things, but the tent poles of this entire operation are intake and QA. So making sure that the request comes in correctly and making sure that the request is double checked. You can build great, but those two things will make things so much better, and you will thank yourself. And then, as I mentioned, reducing friction wherever possible. The marketing team will love you, if only because you have made the process as easy as you can make it for them. And then, Robin, I'm so glad you dropped the question. I'm no longer with Etumos, but I did work pretty hard making this kit, so I'm still just going to send it out there as like a thing that I made for help make for people. This has a lot of really great checklists in there. If there are any specific checklists that folks are looking for, there's a lot of stuff floating around the Etumos website that I helped create. So if you just want to hit me up on LinkedIn, I can definitely like find it, surface it, send it your way. And yeah, I think that's like my favorite things are on the Etumos website somewhere. So I'd be very happy to pass it along. And I don't work there anymore, so I don't think it's a plug for them. Yeah, Emily doesn't work there anymore either. So we can sort of unbiasedly vouch for it. But yeah, that's everything we have today. I think we have about 10 minutes for questions. And I think we did have one. So give me a minute to drink some water and then we can go from there. Let me figure out how to stop sharing. Okay. All right. So Shweta, I know you were mentioning, so the process end-to-end for collating and choosing the templates. What do you mean by templates in this case? I know in MOPs, I feel like we use templates to mean like a million different things. So what templates are you referring to specifically?
Am I audible? Am I audible? Hey, hi. So my question is, when an email goes out, so I'm not a part of that team. I am into list imports and everything else. I'm in the after part. So my question is, when an email campaign has to go out and the marketer is saying that, okay, this is my campaign and this would be the whole criteria. So the templates that will go out in the email, I mean, the email actually, I mean, what we would be using as
yeah. So I think I understand. I'm going to give you an answer, but if it doesn't answer the question, please ask me another question. So one, the best templates out there have a lot of different modules, right? So, and again, I don't know if you've worked with a really good modular template, but they will have like 5 different header options, 3 different button options, different like side-by-side module options, right? So you will have all the building blocks you need. And this may be a case where we're like, I'm wondering if you just haven't seen a good modular template. Upcraft does really good ones. Again, not related to them in any way. I just really like their template. So Upcraft is a really good vendor for that. And then, so your physical email template itself has all of these modular options that makes it very easy for you to do whatever they want. Then what you really need to do is pair that with what I'm going to call like sub templates, for lack of a better word, right? Is that in your Marketo program templates, you are telling your marketers in advance that like, hey, this is what a standard invite looks like, right? This is your heading. This is your body copy. This is your image. This is how it's styled, right? So you tell them that in advance so that way they know what they're working with. And then there's usually like, I like to offer a supplementary doc of like, this is like every option we have. So that way, if they don't like the standard, they can pick some different options. The other thing then is that this is where sort of the intake process also matters of like, sometimes you need to look over the copy and like tell them in advance if it's possible or not. Or depending on your relationship with the team, letting it be known that like, hey, if you have a really complicated build, just like grab 15 minutes with me in advance of the request. So that way you can like, I've done that with a lot of stakeholders is where I'm like, let's just like noodle together, right? Let's just like hop into Marketo together. I'll share my screen, show me your copy. Let's see what's possible to see if you even like it. Does that help?
Okay. Yes, it was. So I am basically not a part of this team, but I'm curious how things work end to end, and probably these are different teams involved.
Yeah. That's like
So
fair. And that's the thing. And I think so marketing ops, I think there's quite a bit of like telling people, not necessarily letting them ask. And that's where like having those pre-baked, like this is what an invite looks like really helps, right? Because a lot of times marketers just want to like write the copy. They just want to give you copy to promote their event and not necessarily like futz about the emails. That's your job. But then other marketers will want fancier options. And then if you have a really good template, you're able to provide them with like, okay, cool. Yeah,
yes,
do a fun heading. Here are your
but
options.
so when I was learning, so I've been learning. It's been some time. I have been actively trying to learn. So I see that there are templates available, but they are the basic ones. And
Mhm.
when we are trying to cater to audience with some specific product, we
Yeah.
need to have a very so probably we could just reach out to third party vendors for
I
those
think so.
templates.
Yeah. And I think I'm the more we're talking, the more I'm convinced you don't have particularly good email templates because a really good template can be can
I
be super flexible, right?
Oh, okay.
That's the thing. Like even if you have multiple brands, like you can take a single template and sort of mold it into like different ways that you need it.
Uh-huh.
What's his face? John Larson at Upcraft has done some interesting videos about using their template. I just want you to watch them. This is not me promoting them. This is just for me, for you to see what's possible with
Uh-huh.
a really good template, because
Uh-huh.
he will sort of showcase all their different modules, and I think that might help you. It might make things a little bit more clearer for you to
Thank
physically
you.
see a
Thank
good
you.
template.
And also the last part, and
Yeah.
you shared one of the link. You're connected with me on LinkedIn. Please share the same
Okay.
for the that
Oh
for
yeah.
this.
Yes, I can do that. Absolutely.
All right. Thank
I'll
you.
find
Bye
it.
bye.
All right, I got it. Cool. Any other questions, comments?
And yeah, the last one. The last. I had two questions actually
Oh yeah.
posted.
Let's jump into Robin's for a second. You're absolutely welcome, Erin. This is one of my favorite things to talk about. Right. So this is where. So the question is suggestions on ways to get all the information you need up front and monitor tasks without overtasking, which is an excellent concern. This is where when you're like rolling out a lot of this stuff is doing the trainings, or also like I like to do like soft pilots with like my favorite people in the marketing team, so that way you can get their buy-in, and then when you do the full launch of this, you're like, yes, and so and so also sort of sat with me during the creation process of this, and they're very happy to use it. The overtasking probably does need to happen, but it needs to happen at the beginning of the launch, right? Is just to until people like you kind of need to be up in people about it. And this is where I think figuring out how people want to get that information from you is very helpful, right? That's kind of where you probably need to commit just time to like slacking people, emailing, calling, DMs, like office hours, like you have to be annoying. You do have to be annoying at some point, so that way people recognize that you're serious. But at a certain point, they will realize that you were serious and they will get it. Or you will learn throughout this entire badgering people of like why it's not working, right? Because maybe you thought the form was simple and everybody who looks at it is like, have you lost your mind? This is the most complicated form. I never want to fill it out. And you'll be like, okay, this is the feedback we need. And yes, Emily brings up a great point about keeping comms in the PM tool as well. So that way you can monitor without monitoring. You can just see the comments and sort of know what's happening on there. And having the subtasks also helps. So that way up front, you know sort of what the deadlines are and as things are getting completed. You can keep a friendly eye on things. My favorite trick for that is like if I don't see the copy tasks moving along at the pace that they should be for my build task, I'll definitely just like shoot them a note on the side of like, hey, I think you guys need some more time here. Like, should I move out the other tasks? And most of the time they'll be like, oh yeah, things are running behind here. And so like it happens in a really friendly way where like you're not necessarily pressuring them, but you're just like, I see you need more time. Shall we build more time in? And it kind of works out. We got about 1 minute left here. Any other questions from folks? All right.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. I learned so much. Every time I hear you present, I always learn a ton. And I feel like I've seen all types of campaign operations and still learn so much. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. I think people underestimate how much goes into campaign ops.
You know, really, like if you've seen it done poorly, and then you're like, wow, what a difference when someone like yourself, a professional, is like this, follow these steps. It's like night and day. So really appreciate your time, everybody. If you have any questions or are looking to do more with Austin Marketo Mug, reach out to me. And thank you so much for joining today. And you guys have a great day.
Great. Fantastic. I'll see you folks around.
Bye, y'all.